of your soul. Hear the cry, fear won't still. Hear the heart's call to will. Hear a sigh, startling trill. In your soul, in your soul. From the place where you stand to the outermost strand, do you hear, oh my friend? Do you hear all the dreams, all the dares, all the sighs, all the prayers? They are yours, mine and theirs. Do you hear, do you hear? Do you hear, oh my friend, in the face where you stand, through the sky, through the sky? Do you hear, do you hear, in the heights, in the height, on the plain, in the vale, in the sun, in the sun? Do you hear, do you hear, do you hear?
Thank you for joining us here in person, and thank you for joining us remotely by Zoom, where we will continue live streaming and posting these services on our YouTube channel for our virtual attendees. I'm Tinka Friend, a member of the Worship Committee, and I will be your worship associate today. Our other members of the Worship Committee, one you saw helping get this together this morning, Grace, thank you. And then the other, Alec Peck, who's not here, but he's singing the hymns that you can see up there. We welcome you to join us this morning with an open mind and an open heart, but with muted electronic devices, please. Our Unitarian heritage calls us to recognize the inherent good of all people, while the Universalist part of our tradition encourages us to extend love and acceptance to all people. You are welcome in this congregation, whatever your gender identity, your racial identity, your faith tradition, your class, or your ability. Our principles call us to affirm the worth and dignity of every individual, to accept one another, and to foster each other's spiritual growth. Thank you for joining us here this morning. Although our doors are open, the pandemic is not over. So while we are in the sanctuary, please keep your masks on and socially distance. And now I invite you to sit back, take a slow, deep breath as we move into the worship hour. For our call to worship, you are welcome to read with me the mission statement of our church. Our mission is to foster a diverse religious community that celebrates life, affirms the individual, encourages spiritual growth and open thought, and works to advance social justice and environmental sustainability. Let me tell you a little bit about our speaker this morning. Eugene Moy has been a longtime public history advocate. He is a native of Los Angeles, and his Chinese American heritage goes back many places, like San Francisco, Montana, Seattle, Omaha, Calgary, Detroit, New York, and Santa Barbara, as well as 3 generations in Los Angeles. He is retired from a career in municipal planning and is actively involved with the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California, the Chinese American Museum in LA, the Alhambra Historical Society, an affordable housing group in El Monte, and the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, which has been an advocate for Chinese American civil rights since 1895, which is 4 years after we were established here at this church. Riverside's historical Chinatown site at Brockton and Tequesquite has been a subject of public negotiation since the 1980s. Has anybody ever been there? Have you ever seen where it is? Okay. The site has been designated as a significant landmark at the city, county, state, and federal levels. And yet, there is a constant threat to the archaeological resources on the site and to its future as a historic place. The Save Our Chinatown Committee, SOCC, has since 2008 been advocating for the permanent protection of the site through the development of a Riverside Chinatown Heritage Park. SOCC members will share current progress. We have 2 lightings of sacred flames. The first is the occupied Indigenous Peoples Remembrance Candle. The second is the lighting of our own chalice, which is the symbol of our faith. We walk upon the traditional territories of diverse and sovereign peoples, the original people of this land, who continue to cry out for justice and self-determination. This spot that we occupy right now was first the sacred space of several groups of Indigenous peoples, including the Cahuilla, the Cupena, and the Serrano. We, the Universalist Unitarian Church of Riverside, light this sacred flame as the stewards of this sacred and holy place. We are blessed with a space and opportunity to strive to live out our common principles, to bring justice, equity, and compassion into our daily lives, to resist all that threatens the earth and her people, and to be a part of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let these thoughts carry us forth as we journey and worship together this morning.
The key, please.
Today's reading of the chalice lighting is Come Into the Circle by Israel Zangwill. Come into the circle of love and justice. Come into the community of mercy, holiness, and health. Come, and you shall know peace and joy.
Everybody have 2 Boy Scouts that can rub together? Well, this thing I think just shows this particular one to empty out.
Oh, there.
1 for 2.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, some good adaptation.
We have a tradition here at UUCR to welcome those who are visitors or perhaps returning after some time away. We know it can be uncomfortable to stand up and speak in front of others, and so I'm going to ask for a volunteer. Someone who's been here a while to tell us their name and how they found out about our church. So when you come up, please be sure to step close to this mic right down here, speak directly into it, and speak clearly and loudly so everyone can hear. So is there anyone that's willing to come up? So tell us your name, how long you've been here, and how you found out about our church.
Good morning, everyone. I've been here since 1955, when my parents came here from Minnesota. And I first came to this church in 1965. I became a Unitarian while I was in high school. That's more than you wanted to hear, isn't it?
No, thank you.
Okay, I've got more.
No, just short.
Okay. I live in Chula Vista, but my mother lives here in Riverside.
And what was your name again?
Alan Ridley.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, thank you. That's how it's done. So if you're new here, if you're a visitor, or even if you're just an old friend returning, please raise your hand to stand and come up to the mic right here in front of the pulpit. And if there's anyone online who would like to introduce themselves, also please indicate that and we'll call on you by Zoom. So let us know who you are, where you're from, and how you found out about us. So we're all old timers. Okay, well, if there are some new guests that want to join us for socializing and coffee hour after the service, please, we welcome you to do that. We would love to chat with you out in our parish hall. That's the room that you entered when you first came in. And there you will find the visitor's book. And if you haven't already, please leave your name before you leave so that we know you were here, and leave your contact information if you want to know about upcoming events, of which there are many. For those online, the best way to get added to the mailing list is to email the church office at admin@uuchurchofriverside.org. Adam, was there anyone who indicated they wanted to introduce themselves? Okay, thank you. So before we enter into farther into the service, there are some announcements we would like to share. And during the service, we will mention several websites, email addresses, and phone numbers. At the end of the service, we're going to leave up a slide, especially for those online, with all of this information, and it is also available on our website. Sharing joys and concerns is one of the important rituals in our community, and it's an opportunity for us to share our milestones, our losses, our achievements, and our experiences with one another. Now that our doors are open again, on the first Sunday of each month, we can both hear from those in the sanctuary and read the contributions we have received. So in front of the pulpit, there is a book where you can write down your joys and concerns whenever you're here in person in the sanctuary. For those of you at home, you can send your joys and concerns anytime throughout the month to uuchurchofriverside@gmail.com. And our next joys and concerns will be on June 5th. We have some fun activities coming up. And one of them is our family barbecue, which is on May 30th. The tickets are pre-sale only, $20 for adults and $12 for children 6 through 12, and children 5 and under are free. So come and join us, and let's all share. That's Memorial Day weekend. And there's a 50-50 UUCR Maintenance Fund raffle. It's a fun opportunity to contribute to the upkeep of this beautiful historical church. Raffle tickets will be sold for $5 each, and then they'll be put into a container. And the winning ticket will be selected from this pot during our summer barbecue on May 30th. And the proceeds will be split with 50% going to the church and 50% going to the raffle winner. You do not need to be present, I hear, in order to win, because you're just going to write your name on the cards, on the little tickets. Please see, is Avery in the room? Okay, either Robert or Avery. I know Avery's out there. So if you want more information, you may ask him. And there's a drum circle today, May 15th, here at the church, starting at 5:30 p.m. The full moon will be what's known as a blood moon, as there will be a full lunar eclipse between somewhere around 9:30 or 10 this evening. There will be like a finger food potluck, food you can just eat with your fingers, sandwiches, fruits, other things like that. Children are welcome. Please contact Linda Van Voorhees if you want more information. And I do not see Linda here today. The Social and Environmental Justice Committee meeting is today in the annex, which is the building next door, at 12 o'clock noon. And you can find the Zoom link and more information on the website under Social and Environmental Justice. Yes. Okay, and there is a bake sale today immediately following the church service. It will be over in the parish hall where you came in, and Dinah always cooks up lovely, delicious things, and other people as well. So if you want to buy some extra things to eat, to munch on afterwards, please see Dinah. You're the one that will be selling the items. Okay, and now our hymn is number 123, which is Spirit of Life in the gray hymnal. Again, feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, but please keep your masks on. And those of you who are so inclined, stand in body or spirit and join us in singing 123, Spirit of Life. Thank you. You may be seated. This portion of our service is to support our beloved historical church, and this can be accomplished in several ways. In addition to the weekly collection, you may send your checks to the church address, which is shown here. You may contribute by PayPal using the QR code, which is on the church's website and also in our church newsletter. And Stater Brothers Market gives our church a rebate on Stater grocery cards, which we will have in church each Sunday. You get the full value and the church receives a percentage. So please donate as the Spirit moves you by whatever method works best for you. Thank you for your generosity, and to those who give of their time and their talents, we thank you for your generous care and attention. Will our ushers now please come forward to receive the collection? Our next hymn is number 402, From You I Received, again in the gray hymnal. Feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, but please only remember with a mask on. And for those who are so inclined, please stand in body or in spirit and join us in singing hymn number 402, From You I Received.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive,
Please be seated. Our meditation today is a responsive reading. It's titled, I Am Only One. It's by Edward Everett Hale. And please join me in reading the italicized lines. I am only one. I cannot do everything. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. Now, let us pause for a moment as we contemplate these words of wisdom. hopefully we each thought of something, that one thing that we could do. Now I would like to introduce Eugene Moy, who's going to be speaking with us on preserving our shared legacies. And I just, the hymn that we did, Spirit of Life, and it talks about roots hold me close, wings set me free. And when I interpret that in my sign language, the roots that hold me close, I use this sign, which is past generations, our ancestors hold us close. We build upon what they have done. And I just think that's so perfect for today, what Eugene is going to speak to us about the Chinatown here in Riverside in the past. You want to come up? You can come up here if you want.
Thank you, Tinka, and for graciously allowing me an opportunity to share what little I can do. I'm at 73 years old now. I've been involved in community activities for many, many years. And here I am still running around trying to do what I can do. And so my purpose here today is just to share briefly with you a little bit of what the Riverside Chinatown is all about. You may have heard in the newspapers or even seen a few documentary presentations that share a little bit of the history of Riverside's Chinatown. I am, as you saw from the bio on the screen, I'm a native Angelino Californian, as is my wife. And by the way, my wife Susan and I are both native Californians. We were married at the neighborhood Unitarian Church in Pasadena. So we have a long relationship there. Anyhow, the history of Chinese Americans is deeply intertwined with that of all of Riverside. And this is kind of the story that we have been trying to share, that oftentimes, the political and social forces cause a separation of people. And one of the things that academics, socially active people in the community and others have been really trying to do is to really provide a wider understanding of the deep role that Chinese and other Asian Americans have contributed to the history of Riverside and of the whole Inland Empire. The earliest Chinese actually came to the Americas with the Spanish and Portuguese and Dutch colonial powers. There were actually many Chinese in North, South, and Central America by the 1600s. With that early heritage, many actually filtered into California. So we know that, for example, in 1815, the governor of California, Governor de Sola in Monterey, had a Chinese house servant who was baptized at the Carmel Mission. There are other examples, but I'm just using this as an illustration that the Chinese and Filipino and actually the South Asian Indian community have been long embedded in the Americas. And that history is just not that well known or not known by the larger public. Many of our forebears actually integrated into the local environment, married Native American, married Mexican, married or Spanish, and others, so that oftentimes the bloodlines aren't very clearly evident. But the history is here. In Riverside, the earliest identifiable presence of Chinese was in the 1870s with the development of the citrus orchards. We know that citrus contributed to the prosperity of the whole Inland Empire as well as Riverside, so that by the 1890s, we know that Riverside was one of the wealthiest per capita communities in the nation. The presence of Chinese, however, was struck a blow by the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And I think many of you may have heard about it or were aware of it. The presence of Chinese in the orchards and in the households, many households in the community had Chinese cooks and house servants. The Mission Inn had many Chinese cooks and hotel assistants. So oftentimes, not only here in Riverside and many other places across the West, many felt that this intrusion or this growing population posed a threat. So the US Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. It was in place for 61 years until 1943. It at first prohibited laborers, then later on merchants and all Chinese. So that exclusion era really impacted the dynamics of our Chinatown communities. In Riverside, we had our first earliest Chinese up on, actually on the site where the Mission Inn is today. The first complete Chinatown was at 9th and Orange. In the 1880s, the city council decided that there were too many Chinese, and so the Chinese were banned or banished to the outskirts of town, to the corner of Brockton and Tequesquite. And that's the site of the Riverside Chinatown site on the screen that you see today. Brockton on the right, north-south, and then the east-west street is Tequesquite. And it lays as a vacant lot at the present time. The last resident of Chinatown and the last owner was a fellow named George Wong, a very historic figure in Riverside's community history. He was a good friend of mayors, of police chiefs, and was very politically connected, interestingly. But because of the Exclusion Act, there was no replacement population. And gradually, either the people moved away or the population died out. George passed in 1974. He's buried at Evergreen Cemetery. There are other Chinese who are buried at the cemetery on Central Avenue on the other side of the 91. We celebrate the heritage. We, the Save Our Chinatown Community, Save Our Chinatown Committee, celebrate the historic presence of the early Chinese with a Qingming, a Chinese Memorial Day ceremony every year. But what is our main goal? It's really to try and find a way to share the history of the early presence of Chinese. By the way, when the Chinese Exclusion Act was having its greatest impact, there was a great need for replacement workers. So the farmers and ranchers, the citrus owners, decided, well, what are we going to do? We're going to have to hire others. So that's when Japanese workers, Filipinos, Indians, Koreans, and others came into the community. So we have a long history of Chinese and other Asians in the community. More recently, the city, county, state, and federal governments have recognized this Riverside Chinatown historic site. It's one of the last intact sites. The buildings are gone, unfortunately, but there is substantial archaeology in the ground. And the goal is to be able to reconstruct a lot of the social framework of the community. What did people eat? How many people lived at the site? Actually, on the site, there was a permanent population of about 400. During harvest season, in the field to the west, to the left, there could be as many as 2,500 working in the area. So we had a significant presence here for many, many decades through the until the middle of the 20th century. So to preserve that legacy, the Save Our Chinatown Committee has been really advocating for protecting the archaeology, which is a historic resource under state guidelines, and to encourage the city to protect the site by creating a heritage park. And that's the plan that is on the screen in front of you, to protect the actual building footprints, and then also to create a sort of a cultural center, a small one. It doesn't have to be extensive, but the goal is to try and at least have a place where the children of Riverside, the people of Riverside, can come and learn about this very deep heritage that goes back to the 1870s. So that's our goal. We've been putting this plan in front of the various council members, in front of the mayor, the Rusty, and others who have now followed. So we are still trying to work with the Riverside Parks Department to see if funding could be found for the future. It's on the list of opportunity sites for the Riverside Parks Department. So we are hopeful that there can be a way found to share the rich heritage of the Chinese in Riverside. And that's all I really have to say today. I don't want to stand up and do a big lecture, but it is about networking with people. And if there's anyone who's actually interested in joining our committee, we welcome. I'll be staying through here today, and would welcome a chance to chat with any of you who would be interested. So thank you, Tinka, and really appreciate the opportunity.
Sit right there, because we're going to give an opportunity for question and answer, perhaps.
Okay. Let's see.
Actually, there's one more thing. I am going to have to go back. Sorry. There's another thing before. We have one hymn still left, and then I'll call you back up. And our closing hymn is number 170. We are a gentle, angry people. It is also from the Gray Hymnal. Feel free again to sing as the Spirit moves you, but only with a mask on, and you may stand in body or spirit and join us singing hymn number 170, We Are a Gentle, Angry People.
We are a gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a justice-seeking people,
Thank you. You may be seated. And the benediction is, we have a calling. We have a calling in the world. We are called to honor diversity, to respect differences with dignity, and to challenge those who would forbid it. We are people of a wide path. Let us be wide in affection and go our way in peace. Namaste, amen, and blessed be. Thank you, Eugene Moy, for sharing your valuable time and insights with us this morning. It is sincerely appreciated, and we hope that we will see you here again. And the worship committee was really excited to have somebody to come and speak on this topic today. I don't know if all of you know, but May is the Asian American Pacific Islander Month. And we really wanted to bring that forth into one of our services for this month. So if there are those of you who would like to stay in the sanctuary, we have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions, or maybe if you want to share some discussion or observations about the service, please remain in the sanctuary and online. For the rest of you, you're welcome to adjourn to the parish hall. And if you'll go ahead, Eugene, and come on up here in case anyone has any questions or comments they would like to ask. I know I was struck with when you mentioned about the Chinese exclusion law. Did you say 1882? 82. And as the historian here at the church, 1881 is when this congregation was formed. And many of our members who, founding members of this church, one, Dr. Shugart, that window is dedicated to, he arrived in 1870 and he planted the first orange groves that were here in Riverside. So in my head, I thought the people, the beginning founders of our church were here at the beginning when the Chinese came. And it was a year after this church was formed when that Exclusion Act happened. And I'm hopeful that, with Universalists believing in equality for all people and that we are all God's children, it just made me wonder what they were saying or doing in the walls of this church when that happened. And I hope it was something that I would be proud of.
I welcome any questions, or I can spend time afterwards also. Yes, sir.
Can you go ahead and come up because we have people online that need to hear it as well. So if you could come up to the microphone for your question.
I know that at one point that they'd made it very, very difficult for Asians to bring wives and family over here. How long did it take for them to break that idea? And the second question has to do with, there's a myth around, I don't know whether it's a myth or just a reality that I haven't had a chance to verify yet, but Riverside is said to have a whole line of catacombs, and at least part of the reason was the yellow peril fear thing there. So the first question I had was, how long did it take you guys to get to the point where you could bring your people over? And the second one was any knowledge you had about the catacombs.
Okay, well, thank you. There's a lot of mythology that surrounds oftentimes a new immigrant community. And oftentimes there are stories that are more or less fabricated by the local media. You may have heard of the Hearst newspapers being called the Yellow Press. This is back during the 1880s, and they created a lot of politically charged perceptions of the Chinese community. One of these was that women, Chinese women, were sometimes characterized as being prostitutes or not being healthy for the community. So there, as part of the exclusion laws that were passed, there were some specific provisions that said that made it difficult for Chinese women to come and join their families. And partly because it wasn't really all that safe to be in the communities. There was many violent incidents all across the West. Chinatowns were actually burned down. There were riots in Los Angeles in 1871. The Chinese massacre resulted in hanging or murder of 18 Chinese residents of Los Angeles. So it wasn't a safe place that you would want to bring your women and children here, at least in the 70s and 80s, at the height of the violence. And even by the 1910s and 1920s, there were laws that specifically prohibited Chinese women from coming because of these negative stereotypes and negative perceptions that were created. It just gives you a sense of 100 years ago that sometimes, you know, we complain about the media being manipulated, but that was already being done a century ago. And oftentimes the scapegoats are the new immigrants. You know, even though the immigrants were contributing to the vitality and the economy of the community. So that's something that we all have to be working through today, and hopefully, you know, and I, as you noted from my bio, I'm actively involved in the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, and we have been actively working to help change and improve the perception of Chinese Americans. Just yesterday, by the way, my wife and I were down in San Diego for one of the last Congressional Gold Medal presentations for Chinese American World War II veterans. 2.5 years ago, the US Congress authorized the minting of a special Congressional Gold Medal, which is now at the Smithsonian, to recognize the important role of Chinese American soldiers. We know about Japanese Americans and their heroics during World War II, but there were also Chinese American soldiers and sailors who fought during World War II. And we, the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, have been recognizing the role of the 20,000 or so Chinese Americans who served during World War II. Last month, actually, we had a ceremony aboard the battleship Iowa in San Pedro. And we actually had the terrific opportunity to welcome a few of the widows. Let me quickly answer the second question. On the idea of catacombs or tunnels under Chinatowns, that's also one of these kinds of myths that's been perpetuated. Yes, there were, in many Chinatowns and in many communities throughout, there was gambling and there was opium smoking, and oftentimes these activities were conducted in the basements of buildings. The image that was created by the media sometimes led to this concept of a big underground network of opium dens and gambling places. But the reality is that most 19th century buildings had basements. And whether it's in the downtown of Riverside or downtown of LA or Stockton or San Francisco, oftentimes there were business enterprises. There actually, even today, there are restaurants in the basements of buildings. So what was created was this perception that somehow there was this great underground network that existed. But no, you know, there's no documentation that after all these decades and decades of discussion, I have yet to see a photograph. You would think that it would be documented, there would be a mapping out of the location. Archaeologists have done research, and there really isn't such a thing as an underground Chinatown. I'll take the next question.
Watching a movie recently, and it was called Old San Francisco, and it had a wonderful scene of underground Chinese. It was a fascinating movie, and then the villain got killed in the San Francisco earthquake. But it's an interesting story. It's, it's fabricated and probably emphasizes those. But anyway, I wanted to ask you about the footprint on the Chinatown. I drove by it. I drive by it all the time. It's near where my mother lives, near Brockton. And I drive by that site all the time. And I wonder, gosh, why don't we do something beautiful with this site? So maybe I can join you. But I wondered about the footprint. Was that on? I don't know if we can get that back, the slide. Is that the footprint of the original buildings on the site?
It is.
On the right?
Yes, and actually I have printed copies of a small brochure that we have prepared for
nice.
the electeds, and not wanting to waste a lot of paper, I made about half a dozen copies of the report. So I can share those with you.
Okay, fantastic.
And others. And what is your name, sir?
Alan Ridley. I'll talk to you afterwards.
Alan Ridley. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I wanted to know, so did 400 people live in that footprint? Or
Plus or minus. It just
Okay.
depended on the decade and the season. So most commercial buildings in a Chinatown tended to have businesses like a grocery store, a laundry, an herb shop, and oftentimes in the back, that was where people lived.
Right.
My grandfather had laundry in Montana, in Helena and in Havre,
Yeah.
Montana, in the border. And most of the footprints of those laundries were smaller than this sanctuary here.
Right.
And there would be room where the workers would be doing their ironing work and washing, and then in the back, there would be a kitchen and a place to sleep. So if
Right.
you had half a dozen people working for your laundry, that's where the people stayed.
That's nice. It reminds me of, I was visiting a friend in Vienna, Austria. He was a dentist, and he said, "Oh, you can stay in my office." And I said, "I'm not going to stay in a dentist's office." And he said, "No, it's in old Vienna where the dentist's office was downstairs and the residence was upstairs. And so it's a dental office. And there's this beautiful residence right above your commute is walking down the stairs to work."
And that's the beautiful thing about touring historic places is you begin to realize how much people live kind of the same way. They evolved, at least in their environments.
So I wanted to ask, what happened to those buildings and what happened to Chinatown, and why isn't it there? Why isn't it still there?
The
Maybe a long.
The question is, why doesn't it exist anymore? Why doesn't the Chinatown, what happened to the buildings? Well, there have been fires in Chinatown. The one big one was in the 1890s. Wooden buildings were replaced with brick buildings, masonry. And they survived up until the 1960s, late 60s and early 70s. When George Wong passed away, the property passed into several hands, and eventually most of those buildings were torn down. The current owner of the property is the Riverside County Office of Education, Riverside County Schools. And they have been the owners since the late 1980s. There was a major archaeological excavation done on the site in 1985 and 86. My wife and I were out there sweating in the hot sun in July and August, sifting through some of the material. And I have a 2-volume archaeological report, which I'll share with you a little bit later. But the work that was done validated really the significance of the site, that there was a large population that came and went. It wasn't always there, but especially during harvest, there definitely were a lot of people. By the 90s, by the late 80s, there was actually a state park grant that was made available to the Riverside County Schools. County Schools was getting ready to buy the property, to sell the property to the Riverside County Park Department. But unfortunately, the political discussions that occurred resulted in the money being returned to the state, and the county's park department never bought the property for a heritage park. And the school district has continued to own the property today. Part of the reason is that they have hoped to speculate on the value of the land and to make a profit on it, to sell for a developer to build medical office building or some other use. But that would result in the destruction of the archaeology. So many of our archaeological friends, including the department at anthropology department at UCR, have been supportive of preserving the site, and they were willing to contract out to actually assist with further exploration on the site. So the goal is to really make it an ongoing learning center, to be an educational facility where you could actually look at the site, see the footprints of the buildings, view interpretive exhibits that discuss who lived there, who worked there, and really learn more about the valuable role of the Chinese in the community. You know, there were Chinese Chinatown communities in all of the Inland Empire towns. Redlands had a Chinatown, San Bernardino had a huge Chinatown at 3rd and C Streets, where the new federal courthouse is. There was a Chinatown in Colton, where the Stater Brothers is today, in that block. There was one in Upland. There were 2 Chinatowns in Pasadena. So, and on and on. There were Chinatowns in Anaheim, Santa Ana. So we're looking for a little bit of justice in basically trying to preserve or protect a little bit of the history. I think people aren't asking for a whole lot. Yes, sir.
This will probably be the last question.
All right, so thank you for a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. My question should be relatively short. Are there allies in Riverside that Riverside residents can reach out to kind of press for this? Because I'm going to echo Mr. Ridley. I'd love to see something beautiful there rather than an empty lot. So if there's allies, people that we can reach out to for the people who live in Riverside, to reach out to the elected representatives, who would those be? Who would be the best people to reach out to? And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There have been many friends who have gone to the city council and appeared at public hearings, students from UCR, just people in the community have shown up. Harry Lawton, the late Harry Lawton, who wrote for the Press Enterprise and who also taught at UCR, was a great ally. And unfortunately, he's not around anymore, but we need friends like him who can write about and do the research and really support some kind of a project to preserve our Chinatown and preserve our shared legacy. You know, that's part of the title of my presentation, is that it's a history that belongs to all of us. As I mentioned, the Mission Inn had many Chinese workers. Matthew Gage, who had a jewelry store in downtown Riverside, was the guy who invested in and built the Gage Canal, which brought water down to the orchards in Riverside. And he hired Chinese workers to build the Gage Canal. So it's deeply the history of Chinese, Japanese, Filipinos, Indians, Koreans. It's all deeply embedded in our history. And I hope that we'll all join together to work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if you want to ask more questions or continue discussion, you can out in the parish hall. Thank you.